The Jelly Prince, for Andy. Written by your dad and read by me, Richard. 1. His name was Edwin, though everyone called him the Jelly Prince. He was born to the king and queen without much celebration from the people. It was from the time that he tried to walk that the cruel rumours started circulating around the palace, calling him the Jelly Prince. You see, he had some kind of disease, a sickness which stopped his bones from getting hard. Instead, they were like rubber, and his arms and legs and head would wobble around like jelly pudding. He couldn't walk, and he couldn't run, and he couldn't play, but he would never stop trying, his arms spinning around like a windmill, his legs bending forwards and then backwards, his head bobbing around from side to side, his whole body moving in 2, sometimes 3 different directions at once, finally falling to the floor, his arms and legs poking out in all sorts of crazy directions. He was the Jelly Prince, and the name stuck with him. 2. He was always trying, though, and always smiling. His brave, slow determination slowly softened the heart of the king, who was not a cruel king, but like most kings was not really very nice. But seeing his son struggling, always smiling, never giving up, turned him from a not really very nice king into a not really unkind king, which was enough for the people of his kingdom to lead much happier, healthier, less taxing lives. And the people knew it was the Jelly Prince, in his rubbery roundabout way, who had changed their lives, and they loved him for it. They celebrated him. The Jelly Prince! It was as he got older, and all the best doctors, magicians, quacks, witches and sawbones could do nothing to cure him, that he no longer tried to walk, run or play. He instead would be carried around by his faithful, bear-sized servant Augustus. He was just about 12 years old now, and this is where our story begins. 4. It was a late winter's morning. The Jelly Prince was lying in bed reading a book about alchemy and algebra, turning numbers into gold, when Augustus came shambling into the room. He, Augustus, spent most of his time carrying the young boy around on his back. The rest of his time was spent down in his basement laboratory. He had spent most of his life dabbling in alchemy, trying to turn vegetables into gold or diamonds or into anything else for that matter. He spent his free time now trying to find a cure for the Jelly Prince, trying to turn the jelly in the young boy into bone. Yet, despite all the late nights and all the weird and wonderful treatments and magic spells, he remained unsuccessful. But there was something he found last night, something that gave him hope. "Good morning, sire," Augustus said, his face not smiling, but his eyes signalling, to the Jelly Prince at least, that something was afoot. Bah, another cockamamie cure, thought Edwin, his eyes quickly darting back to the book he was reading. The book was attached to quite an ingenious device, which formed a kind of bridge over the prince as he lay in bed. His arms were attached to strings, which were attached to levers, which were attached to the book. So by moving his arms, wobbly as they were, he was able to read a book and mostly not lose his place, or, as sometimes happened, send the whole book flying up into the air. Augustus, bending down and scooping the young boy up, effortlessly in his arms, for his morning toilet, unsurprisingly said, "I have found something interesting, sire, only last night." 6. The Jelly Prince, hiding a wry smile, finished his ablutions while Augustus told him his latest findings. A manuscript, written in one of the more obscure, older languages that Augustus knew, told the story of a magical cave in a far-off land that had the magical property of curing any illness or disease. The problem was that it was a really long, long way away. It would take them years to get there. Years, Augustus thought, that the boy just didn't have. But, aha, cried Augustus in a burst of enthusiasm, I have found, if I have properly understood this ancient language, a portal, a kind of magic door that would bring us to the cave in no time at all. He went on to explain that the portal lay on the edge of his father's kingdom, no more than a couple of weeks' ride away, and that he, the Jelly Prince, could endure such a ride, especially if it would make him healthy. 7. Ah, here we go again, Edwin thought, shivering, which caused his body to wiggle and waggle, as he sat with his naked bum on the cold wooden stool which stood over his bucket. Even princes had to deal with cold toilet seats, Edwin, managing to get a little control over his head, looked up at Augustus, his face covered with a wild mop of brown hair. "Perhaps a haircut first," he said, knowing there would be no way of talking the big man out of wanting to go. 8. And so it was, on the first warm day of spring, that Augustus and the Jelly Prince started their journey. Now, most princes would have a complete entourage of cooks, servants, jesters, or at least a few grumpy, grizzled soldiers for protection. But not the Jelly Prince. Everyone loved the Jelly Prince. The journey took on the feel of a carnival, with people joining them, offering them rides and food, entertainment and places to sleep. It seemed like no time before they reached the forest on the most southern border of his father's kingdom. It was a small forest, lying in a little valley, surrounded on both sides by the grey cliffs of the mountains. Mountains that no one climbed, mountains that no one crossed, mountains always covered by clouds and full of myths and superstitions. But it was not the mountains that interested them, or their stories. It was the little V-shaped forest. For in there was the magical doorway. Or so they hoped. 9. It was true that everyone loved the Jelly Prince. They loved him for his brave courage and determination. Or almost everyone. All but one. Indeed, all stories need a villain, because there just wouldn't be any excitement without one. 10. Who is she? The Jelly Prince asked, his head wobbling around as usual. They had made camp in the small forest and were alone for the first time in weeks. Augustus had instructed everyone not to follow any further, and, sitting around their campfire, their talk had turned to the one person, or better said, thing, that did not have any love for Edwin. "Not she, it," corrected the big man, bending down and shoving a piece of wood into the fire. "It lives inside a woman's body at present, but it is a ghost, a spirit, many thousands of years old. It is determined to bring suffering and misery into the world. All things good are its sworn enemy, and that is you, sire," he said softly, now adjusting the rough travel blankets which formed Edwin's bed. "It is you whom it, she, if you like, would most like to destroy. It is clever and evil, but helpless to harm you or anyone in your father's land. Since the last great magic war, before you were even born, we stripped it of all its power, at least within this kingdom. And every year we renew the great spell that keeps it banished, and you and all the people in this land safe from it. I personally have been overseeing the yearly spell renewal ceremony myself the last 20 years. Augustus sat down on his own makeshift bed of travel blankets, his bald head seeming to come alive in the dancing firelight. He gave a soft laugh, more inside his body than out, and proceeded. "That doesn't stop it from trying, though. It has tried many a cunning trick these past few years, but as always the spell holds fast. In a way, it's like an annoying fly buzzing round your head." "And not being able to swat at it," said the prince. "I know all about that." "Get some sleep, sire," said Augustus, in a friendly, sympathetic voice. 11. Augustus leaned back in the dim firelight, examining the parchment he had brought with him. Yes, he thought, this is definitely right. The Old Ones had made a magic doorway to the Cave of Healing, and it was in this forest, and they would find it. It was the last option for the young prince. He was getting worse, and Augustus could simply not bear losing him. There was magic around. He could feel it. He had spent his whole life studying it, and he could sense it. There was magic here. Also, from his pocket, he could sense a low throbbing. It was coming from the ring he kept there. The ring he had gone out searching for on a really dangerous adventure many years ago. The ring reacted to magic by slowly vibrating and speeding up the closer you got to the source of the magic. He had been using it as a kind of compass since they had entered the forest, carefully following the vibrations and going in whichever direction caused the ring to vibrate more strongly. He removed it from his pocket, holding it in the flat of his hand. It was big for a ring and would easily fit over Augustus's large thumbs. It was old, as all magic, mystical objects must be. It must have belonged to a giant, one of the old ones, a race of people long since died out. Augustus studied it in the dying firelight. It was red, a dark wine red, and where most other rings would have a diamond or some other precious stone, there was the form of a beetle. It was amazingly detailed, and Augustus, who had studied it in his laboratory, had realized that it was in fact a ladybird. But now, not only was it vibrating, the beetle was starting to glisten. There were the tiniest drops of black liquid starting to form on the wings, exactly where a real ladybird had its black spots. It was, he realized, not just reacting to the magic in the air, but catching it, condensing the magic into the tiniest of dewdrops. He had no idea why, and he was simply using the ring to guide them to the magic door. Just exactly why the ring was turning magic into little black drops of liquid and what it was good for would have to wait until he was back in his lab. He carefully wrapped the ring in a delicate cloth and put it back in his pocket, lay down on his makeshift bed, and closed his eyes. The faint throbbing that he felt coming from the ring was a comfort to him, and he soon joined the prince in sleep. 12. In the morning, they found what they were looking for. It really didn't look like much. A child-sized stone sticking out of the ground in the middle of a clearing. "Well, not exactly what I was expecting," said the young boy, his face just barely peeking over Augustus's large, rounded shoulder. "No mistake, sire. This is the place." Edwin could feel the slight tingle on his nose, which was the magical field Augustus had trained him to feel. It was strong, stronger than he had ever felt before. A surge of uncommon hopefulness filled him. "I would really like to be a normal boy," he thought. "To be able to run and play and be a good ruler when I'm older." Augustus shifted the boy from his back so that he was holding him in his arms like he would hold a baby. "Are you ready, sire? It will take no more than me to lay my hand out on that stone," Augustus said. The ring in his pocket was vibrating so fast that it left him with no uncertainty that that was all he had to do. 13. The stone felt cold under Augustus's hand, cold like the ice of the skating pond in winter. And just when he thought he could no longer keep his hand on the stone, just when he thought he was wrong, there was a flash of bright, unbearable white light, and then nothing. Complete darkness. Silence. Edwin could feel that he was still lying in Augustus's arms, could feel the prickle of magic all over his body. He could tell they were no longer in the forest, but where were they? Had it worked? Were they in a cave? Thousands of miles away? He could see nothing and hear nothing. Opening and closing his eyes made no difference. It was so dark. He could hear his heart. It sounded like it was in his head, and in fact was all he heard. Even though he was scared, terrified, he couldn't help but notice the defect in his heartbeat. Excited as he was, his heart pumping very fast, it wasn't steady, not regular ba-da, ba-da, ba-da. Instead, his heart sounded like a three-legged horse trying to gallop. The illness that had turned him into the Jelly Prince was not just affecting the bones and muscles that he needed to walk and run, but also the muscles on his insides that he needed to live. Augustus was right to be worried, and to try desperate and crazy things like this. The Jelly Prince had always known, but now he heard for himself. He was dying. 14. "Augustus?" the Jelly Prince said, his voice managing to hide the fear. "Are we there?" "I do not know, sire," he said. And indeed, his voice had no telltale echo that you would normally hear in a cave. His voice had no echo at all. These thoughts were just crossing his mind when a little round yellow light appeared in the darkness. It grew in size and hung over their heads like a little sun. As their eyes slowly adjusted to the light, their hearts filled with despair. 15. They were not in a cave. but in a small, windowless room. The walls were bare, rough hewn rock. The floor was covered with ankle-high straw. In the middle of the room was the stone, Augustus with his hand still on it. There was no door. It was a trap. 16. The room then slowly darkened. A shadow that seemed to be felt more than seen filled the room. "Yes," said an evil, mechanical, whispering voice that came from nowhere and everywhere. "Yes, Augustus, you know who this is." Augustus knew who it was. It was the ancient spirit. It had no name, or none that he knew of. It had turned evil after thousands of years of being alone. He also knew what it wanted. It wanted the Jelly Prince, to get rid of him and once again bring chaos and despair to the world. It was a trap. The old spirit had found a weak spot in their defense, right at the edge of their borders, where their magic would be weak. It had tricked them with its old fake parchments, that there was a healing cave, that it existed. There was no doubt. It had merely fooled them into believing there was some kind of magic doorway there. And the stone was the trigger of the trap they now found themselves in. An amused hissing laughter filled the room. "My dear Augustus, I see you have figured it out, how I did it," it hissed, the amusement gone from its voice. "You were a fool," it hissed again, angrier. Inside the Jelly Prince, the despair he had been feeling turned into anger. "You can kill me if you like," he suddenly shouted. "I will be dead soon anyway, probably in not more than 2 months, so you could have saved yourself all the time and effort." "Oh, I don't want to kill you, young Jelly Prince. I have found a spell that will cure you. Oh, yes, make you all better. Turn all your jelly into bone. I'm so much cleverer than your dim-witted Augustus. I will take over your body, inhabit you. Your mind will be dead, but I will have your body. And then, as the Jelly Prince, I will rule my kingdom of ruin. I will be back, so prepare for despair, young Jelly Prince." The shadow in the room disappeared with the dark voice that carried it, and the light returned to the room. 19. Augustus, who understood how they had got caught, explained it to Edwin. "This forest," he explained, sitting down with the young boy in the straw, "this forest is the farthest you can be from the center of our kingdom. The spell still holds true, but it is at its weakest. Furthermore, the mountains help weaken it too. It, the dark spirit, focused all its strength, it's probably very weak now, on that one stone. The one stone that was no longer under protection, no longer in our kingdom, so to speak." With Edwin lying on his lap, he rubbed his forehead with his left hand and continued. "As I touched the stone, with you on my back, we were vulnerable, and it sprung its trap. These walls are not real, sire. They are magic, a magic I can't defeat, an ancient magic." Augustus took a deep breath, straightened his back, and said, "It will recharge its strength and be back. What it wants to do, to take over your body, it has been doing that for thousands of years, sire. As for that spell to cure you of your jelly, I don't know. The magic here is different, but I have a plan." 20. Augustus then showed Edwin the ladybird ring. The huge ring was now almost covered with a black, sticky substance. The Jelly Prince knew at once what he had to do. He knew it the instant Augustus handed him the ring. These magic walls would not stop the ring. Indeed, the ring passed through the walls as if they weren't even there. The ring was older and more powerful than the magic of the old spirit. The Jelly Prince knew what he had to do. He knew that it would take courage, but he had to do it. Augustus told him the ring would pass through the walls. That was true, but the space it made was only big enough for Augustus to get 2 fingers through. But if he, the Jelly Prince, with his rubber bones and rubber muscles, could squeeze his hand and then a little of his arm through the hole that appeared and then quickly disappeared, like a spark of fire that suddenly bursts into the air and then is gone, if he could squeeze and force his hand through the hole and make contact with the ground on the other side of the wall, the spell would be broken and they would be free. 21. It hurt. It hurt like nothing the Jelly Prince had felt before, the pain exploding in his head as the little bones in his hand bent and pushed into one another as he forced them through the hole. The pain screaming at him to stop, to pull his hand away, but he was determined. He was not going to let some misguided ancient spirit ruin the lives of his people. He pushed his hand in, over his wrist, his fingers swelling up with blood like little red sausages, sausages ready to burst. It was just as he thought he could take it no longer, just as he cried out in pain, that his fingers touched a blade of grass in the clearing. Augustus, who had still been holding the prince, rubbing his shoulder for encouragement, knew at once he was successful when he sensed the sun, the real sun, on his face. There had been no flash of light or crashing of rocks as the walls disappeared. They were simply out in the sun. The Jelly Prince, exhausted from the pain, was asleep in Augustus's lap. His right arm, the hand all blue and misshapen, lay slowly twitching in the grass. With the evil not being strong enough to catch them again, they were free. Free to go home. 22. It was months later, and the Jelly Prince's condition had got worse. He no longer left his bed, his body being too frail and delicate to move about. He was very pale, and even the lights in his eyes were no longer there. It was on the day on which he could no longer talk, could no longer move the muscles of his mouth, that Augustus fetched him in the night. Edwin lay in his arms, wrapped in a blanket, his body a limp, lifeless sack of wobbly bones. He was barely awake. Augustus carried him out into the fresh moonlit autumn air, carried him out of the castle and into the forest. It was there, in a large clearing, that he brought him to the bath he had been making. The bath was square and made of rock. It was filled with water, black, warm water. Or was it smoke? It swirled and boiled. It looked at once like the stormy sky, and the next minute like the dark sea, when it was not safe to go out fishing. It was indeed water. Water mixed and enchanted with magic. Old magic. Magic caught by the ladybird ring. One drop of the black liquid from its wings had turned all the water into this swirling mass, creating a magical field that could be felt several miles away. Augustus climbed the 3 steps to the top, the Jelly Prince still in his arms, slowly unwrapped him from the blanket, and walked with him, down, into the blackness. The Jelly Prince inhaled it into his lungs and swallowed it down his throat, the dark water smoke causing him to cough and spit. And that was all. 23. Over the next weeks, the Jelly Prince not only got better, but his bones also finally started to become hard. He began to be able to walk and run and play just like all the other children. But he never broke any bones when he fell, even if it was from a tall tree or his horse. His body almost seemed to bounce whenever he took a tumble. And, because of this, the name he had grown up with stayed with him for the rest of his life. To all those that loved him, he would forever be the Jelly Prince.